When Blue Lock first introduced Bayern München's team, it was pitched as one grounded in a philosophy of extreme rationality. And yet, by the current point in the story, they are by far the most dysfunctional team in the Neo Egoist League. This shift is most prominently embodied in the figure of Michael Kaiser, where the German star was once hailed as the pinnacle of efficient and rational football. We are witnessing his gradual descent into madness. And, on the flip side, this rational style of play is being gradually absorbed by protagonist Yoichi Isagi as he and his Blue Lock comrades have usurped Bayern München from within. So, what I want to do today is examine the significance of rationality for the rivalry between Kaiser and Isagi, as well as show that the concept of rationality itself is more complicated than it first appears. Hello, my name is Sean, and it's time to deconstruct some of our assumptions about the concepts at the heart of the current story arc. In our first introduction to the German team, its philosophy looks remarkably straightforward. BM operates on pure logic, and thus it selects its players exclusively through quantifiable data. Its coach, Noah, places no value on vague notions like emotions or impressions. To put it simply, big numbers go brrr, and whoever ranks highest gets to play. In Noah's eyes, that's what it means to play rationally. But let's flash forward 70 chapters to a scene that complicates BM's data-driven approach. The Germans need to field a new player, and so Noah immediately nominates the highest ranking available substitutes. Isagi, however, asks Noah to field Yoichi, whose playstyle complements his own, instead. Noah at first rejects this seemingly irrational request, but then Hiyori himself makes a strong case why swapping him in is the most rational option. Now, at the time of recording, it's still to be seen if Isagi's and Hiyori's views will be justified. But regardless, this scene leaves us with the lingering question: is resorting to data alone really the most rational course of action? At the very least, having Noah give in suggests that raw numbers don't tell the entire story. But then, the whole foundation of Bayern's approach kind of collapses, doesn't it? After all, once you admit that you also need to interpret and select from the data, you're gonna end up introducing an element of subjectivity into the mix. And that's kind of awkward, isn't it? But in actuality, the notion that rationality is an immutable, objective quality has already long been called into doubt in the manga. When Noah talks to Isagi one-on-one for the first time, he berates the Blue Lock player for allowing wishful thinking into his game plan. For Noah, this kind of irrational thinking disqualifies Isagi from the starting lineup. And so, Isagi seeks to formulate an ideal that will make him into the world's best striker. So during his time on the bench, he analyzes the match and tries to determine what his best move would be if he would be in the given situation. Should he meld into Kaiser's system or try to score goals for himself? Now, on the basis of rational analysis, Isagi concludes that he lacks the skills to replace anyone in Bayern's current system. So logically speaking, this leaves him with only one option. Isagi has to disrupt BM's current strategy to muscle his way into the limelight. That's the irony of Isagi's predicament. His most rational course of action is to resort to irrational play. And as for Kaiser, we learn after the Manchester match that he is actually facing a similar conundrum. Kaiser is stuck on the same team as the world's greatest striker, and so long as he remains in Noah's shadow, he'll never ascend to the position of number one. In a way, he faces a dilemma not unlike that of Isagi in the Barcelona match. He must either prove that he can surpass Noah, or show off his talents in the Neo Egoist League and secure a better offer from another club. And just like how Isagi understood at the start of the arc that he can't compete with the Bayern regulars, Kaiser knows that he is nowhere near Noah's level in his current state. So from this, Kaiser rationally inferred that he must show off his value to other teams instead. And to do so, he must prove that he's leagues ahead of Isagi, who has become the de facto face of the Blue Lock program. Just like with Isagi, every step in Kaiser's thought process is logically sound, and yet his approach gives rise to incredible friction within his team. So here's the massive paradox about the rivalry between Isagi and Kaiser. If we define rationality as acting in accordance with a sense of enlightened self-interest, both Isagi and Kaiser are acting perfectly rationally. But it's exactly because of this rational pursuit of their own interests that they end up on a collision course that plunges their entire team into chaos. Perhaps the best evidence that in Blue Lock, rationality is basically only a means to justify one's selfish desires can be found during the clash between Isagi and Kenyu Yukimiya in the Manchester match. Isagi here proposes teaming up, and time and again he hammers home that this is the most rational, realistic option for the both of them. Yukimiya, however, flat out rejects the terms in which Isagi couches his request. He has, and in my view that's correct, come to understand that appeals to rationality are nothing but a rhetorical device, a cudgel to beat their competitors over the head with. We see elsewhere as well that rationality is a key concept within the power struggles among the egoists of Bayern Munchen. When Alexis Ness confronts Rensuke Kunigami after his first solo play, he reprimands his teammate for his irrational decision-making. Nevertheless, Ness's issue isn't so much that Kunigami made a poor play, but rather that he refused to submit to the established team hierarchy. Here we see Yukimiya's observation in full glory. As Ness's words show, employing the discourse of rationality is actually a euphemistic way of bending others to your will. So with all this in mind, it's really interesting to watch how the perspective on rationality shifts over the course of the arc. As Isagi gradually subsumes Kaiser's place as the head honcho of Bayern Munchen, he also becomes increasingly associated with rational football, whereas it's now Kaiser who displays frequent bouts of irrational behavior. And remember, in Blue Lock, and to be honest, that can also be argued for the real world, the rhetoric of rationality is predominantly employed by and used in reference to those in positions of power. And in contrast, those that dare to oppose such privileged individuals are then cast as irrational actors. So for the rest of the video, I want to trace how there's a direct correlation between the way that talk about rationality has shifted in the manga and the Blue Lock players gaining a stranglehold on the German team. This shift of power over the course of the arc can most easily be traced by looking at the players that make up BM's starting lineup. For their first match, Noah fields 10 of his original players and only Kunigami from Blue Lock. At this point, Kaiser holds almost absolute power over the team and is thereby framed as the poster child of rational football. And so, when Isagi is eventually swapped in, he can only distinguish himself by stealing the ball from his German teammates. We see a slow change, however, at the start of the Manchester match. This time, 5 Blue Lock players have managed to infiltrate the team, and Noah openly admits that he is pitting 2 factions, 2 styles of play against each other. Nevertheless, Noah still perceives Kaiser as the one with the most rational style of football. And lo and behold, Isagi again steals a pass directed to Kaiser at the start of the match. But as the match progresses, the tides start shifting. A few chapters later, Kaiser retaliates and hijacks a pass to Isagi. And Kaiser just continues to sabotage his rival. Over the course of the match, he also blocks Isagi's shot course and knocks him off balance. There's something I never noticed before I actually went to tally all instances of Isagi and Kaiser sabotaging each other, and it absolutely blew my mind once I realized it. After Kaiser starts copying Isagi's antics, Isagi no longer steals the ball from his teammates. In other words, there's no moment in the story where both Isagi and Kaiser are willing to stab each other in the back. I actually have some suspicions about why this is the case. Once Isagi learns Metavision and closes the gap between himself and his main rival, he doesn't need to resort to such petty tactics anymore. But for Kaiser, the very opposite rings true. Back when he was clearly leagues above Isagi, he didn't need to bother about shutting down the Japanese player. But now, Isagi poses an existential threat to Kaiser's place in the team and his grand ambitions. And so, it makes sense that Kaiser now wants to hinder Isagi by any means necessary. As a matter of fact, I can pinpoint the exact moment where Isagi took over the discourse of rationality from Kaiser. It's in chapter 194, when Chris Prince tries to best Noah with an unpredictable, or in his words, irrational shot, and Isagi manages to block it. In a split second, Isagi determines the most dangerous place for the ball to land. He may have needed to gamble here, but he bet on the most rational course of action. And with that, Isagi outmaneuvers the world's second best striker, and by doing so, he consolidates himself as the most rational actor in Bayern's roster. A few chapters later, this is confirmed by Noah himself. Ever true to his philosophy, Noah pairs up with who he perceives as the most rational actor on the field, with Yoichi Isagi. And in direct contrast to the start of the arc, this Isagi can devise a realistic game plan without any uncertainties. This brings us to the Juventus match, and by now, there's no longer any doubt that Isagi is the nucleus of Blue Lock. It's actually interesting on this front that the manga explicitly establishes that Isagi is valued the same amount as Ness, because Ness was actually presented as the heart of Bayern's original team. In the current match, however, we witness the former heart of Bayern spiraling further and further into insanity, whereas Isagi has now comfortably established himself as the dominant presence within the team. At this stage, the narrative about rationality has completely shifted. Isagi is constantly associated with this quality, and Kaiser gets reprimanded for his irrational conduct. And this is reflected in the makeup of Bayern's current team as well. For the first time, the Blue Lock players have the upper hand over the Germans in numerical terms, 6-5. And don't forget, rationality is all about power. The rational ones are always those in the superior position. And at this stage, the Blue Lock players have effectively usurped the team. And so, the power dynamics have completely reversed since the start of the arc. Kaiser and Ness are the only ones that still sabotage their teammates, whereas Isagi even scores a goal despite their interference. At that moment, Isagi demonstrates that he's become such a formidable player that he isn't even fazed by Ness's meddling. Moreover, there's a really interesting parallel between the Manchester and the Juventus matches. In the former, Kaiser blocks Isagi's shot course, but Isagi still shoots, even though he has no realistic chance of scoring. But flash forward 40 chapters, and now, Comrade Oliver Aiku completely seals off Isagi's advance. So once again, Isagi is faced with the same dilemma. Will he still try to shoot, even though his attack was effectively foiled, or will he pass to Yukimiya instead? The second time around, Isagi opts for the rational course of action. He decides to pass. And tellingly, even though it's Kaiser who eventually scores from that setup, the German ace himself admits that the goal was mainly manufactured through Isagi's efforts. In other words, Isagi is now the one aligned with rationality, and that confirms his place at the top of Bayern's food chain. So that's it from my end, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and your theories about how the rivalry between Isagi and Kaiser will play out from here. And if you liked what you saw, do consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. And I hope to see you again soon. Later, guys!